Hello, and welcome to week 7 here of English 112. This week, we're going to be talking about test taking strategies because it is midterm time. So, for this week, we're going to talk briefly about how to prepare for a test and how to take one most effectively. And that applies to really any kind of test, but we will be focusing specifically on essay exams. This is a writing class after all. So, let's go ahead and dive in. So there are really two phases of a test, what you do before and what you do during. So, what do you do before to prepare for an exam? Well, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is studying. But studying is perhaps counterintuitive a little bit now because people don't take notes in the same way that they used to. And so they don't study material the way they did when I was an undergrad. So, what are some things that you study? Well, notes, first of all. Now, this assumes that you actually take notes by hand, which you really should be doing. There have been many studies that have shown that people learn things better by taking notes by hand. Many people now either don't take notes at all. I've seen this several times in my face to face classrooms, which kind of blows my mind a little bit. Or either they don't take notes or they use some like cameras in their phones to take notes of what gets written on the board or put onto the projector. And that's not as effective as taking notes by hand and literally taking notes by longhand as opposed to typing notes. You don't get the same benefit from typing notes as you do from recording them longhand. And the reason for that is when you take notes by hand, you are forced to think about the material more closely than if you take notes by other methods. So, first of all, you have to take notes to be able to study. And then when you study your notes, you don't have to study everything in your notes because ultimately that's not going to be practical. So you have to be able to focus your notes or focus the study of the notes. So you have to be able to identify what is going to be most relevant. Now, there are some ways of determining that because you can, uh, if your professor or instructor gives you a study guide, then that's something which will help you focus your studying of your notes. But if that's not the case, then you need to think about what are some of the main concepts of the course or what are the objectives of the course. So once you know that, then that will help focus your studying because the test is going to cover the main concepts or the course objectives and outcomes in some way. They're designed to be able to do that. What else helps you focus your notes or focus studying on your notes is the way that it's emphasized in class. So, for example, if your instructor writes something on the board or puts something on a projector, if they take the trouble to do that, then it's important. They want you to know that information. So that's stuff that you want to pay particular attention to. What else do you study apart from notes? Study assigned readings. Even though in college, assigned readings aren't always discussed in class, they are still, it's still expected that you will do the reading because the reading will reinforce what gets discussed in class. So look at the assigned readings. They deal with the concepts that you're going to be tested on. And sometimes, often, the test will pertain to your assigned readings in some way. So do the assigned reading. Get caught up on that if you haven't read all of the readings. You can study your previous work as well. So that will help you identify what your weaknesses are and what you need to focus your energy on studying or working on. But also, in the case of quizzes, if you've taken smaller quizzes throughout the term, often when you get to a larger exam, like a midterm or a final exam, the questions will pertain to what you have been quizzed on before. And sometimes the quizzes will, or rather the exams will take questions from those quizzes. So know what you've been studying in class. You can also consider handouts. Again, if we go through the trouble of putting together a handout for you, we want you to know it because it's important. So if you're given a handout, study those. And that includes the syllabus as well. So the syllabus will list what the course outcomes and objectives are, which will tell you or give you a reasonable idea of the sort of thing that you will be tested on. Because again, tests are designed to uh, deal with those course objectives in some way. So look at handouts, including the syllabus. Identify some key terms of the course or the field. That's something else you would want to study. Every discipline has its own jargon or its own special vernacular. So in the case of, let's say, chemistry class, for example, you'll probably have to deal with terms like base and acid and catalysts and stuff like that. In the case of an English course, some key terms you would want to know would be argument, rhetoric, rhetorical strategies and appeals, logos, pathos, ethos. Those are going to be some key terms that you would be expected to know and be able to apply. And then consider the main concepts of the course. What is the course about? So a course in history is really about relationships between events and people in time. A course on physics will be focused on the laws of physics and those sort of concepts. In the case of a writing class, the main concepts are going to be, again, rhetoric, arguments, and in particular for this class, power. What is power? Power is the ability to get what you want or to persuade others to give you what you want. So that's the main concept for this particular class. So the exams are going to be examining those concepts in some way. So those are all things that you can study to prepare for a test. And like I said, this will apply to any kind of test, although we're specifically dealing with essay exams in here. These are techniques or strategies that apply to any test that you'll be taking. And then two other things you have to do beforehand to prepare, which seem obvious and sort of intuitive, are to sleep and eat. Although, like I said, should be obvious, not necessarily so. We live really busy lives, especially as students. I know that you do because you have to work in addition to go to school quite often, or many of you have children, so you have to be able to raise your children and get them to school and so on and so forth. So you have these other responsibilities that cut into your time outside of class. So sleeping and eating, even though these should be really obvious things that you do, you don't necessarily get the chance to sleep and eat properly. So sleeping, why is sleeping important? Well, obviously it regenerates your body. It gives you rest and energy, but also it helps to regenerate your mind as well. So how much sleep should you get? For the average adults, around 8 hours is ideal. Maybe a little bit more or less, and obviously everyone is going to be different. Everyone has their own needs, but somewhere within that range of about 8 hours is ideal. Too much sleep is as bad as too little sleep because you will it will affect your ability to think clearly. If you sleep too much, there's a sort of hangover that comes with that that makes you groggy and difficult to focus. And just like too little sleep, if you sleep too little and you're too tired, all you want to do is sleep. And then eating. What should you eat or what should you avoid eating or drinking for that matter? Ideally, you want to eat protein and avoid carbs. Carbs will give you energy, but the energy is really short-lived compared to protein. Protein gives you longer lasting energy because it takes more uh, calories to be able to burn off that food, which gives you a more extended source of energy. So it lasts longer. Carbs, I mean, there's that old joke that, if you eat carbs, if you eat pasta or rice or whatever, a half hour later, you're hungry again. And that's because the calories in carbs are so low that you burn them off so quickly. So eating protein gives you longer lasting energy. And of course, what is your brain made out of? It's protein. So by eating protein, you're feeding your brain, which helps you to think and learn better. What should you avoid drinking? Caffeine and sugar. Because again, yes, they give you energy, but they will result in that crash that comes when you burn it off. Caffeine in particular, you also want to avoid because it's what's called a diuretic, which means that it dehydrates you by making you need to urinate. And so if you're in a test situation, and really what identifies or characterizes a test situation is a time limit. So if you're in a time situation, you're taking a test and you need to pee, that's all you're going to be able to think about. So caffeine, not good. Sugar, not good. Alcohol should be obvious. That's not good. So you want to avoid those sorts of foods and drinks and eat and drink the things that will be most beneficial to you. Okay. And then the next phase is during. What do you do during the exam to ensure that you're able to complete it or perform most effectively and efficiently? Couple things here which should be, again, obvious, although in my experience, not so much. So showing up, for example, this is really important. I mean, obviously, if you're not there to take the test, then you can't take the test and you can't receive the credit for it. This becomes more of a problem at universities because at universities, tests, sort of high stakes exams like midterms and final exams, are often held at different times and in different places than the regular class meeting is. So you have to know when and where the exam is so that you can show up and take the exam. And I've had students in the past who forget that and they don't show up when the exam is, so they can't take it. So that's not too much a problem at a community college, and certainly not in an online class because you do have much more leeway in when you take the exam. But just so you know, there are courses where that could be a problem. Okay, so show up for the test, bring the proper materials. That could be a Scantron if it's a multiple choice test. It could be an exam book if it's an essay exam. And when I teach this course face to face, I require the use of exam books for the exams. So you will need the proper test taking materials. Should you bring pen or pencil? Well, ideally, you should bring both. If it's a multiple choice test and you're using Scantrons, then you will need number 2 pencils for that. If it's an essay exam in an exam book, then ideally you'll use pen for that. I mean, yeah, people don't like pen because they feel it's messy, and if they make a mistake, they have to cross stuff out instead of being able to erase it. But that's fine. Pen is better than pencil because pen is easier to read, and therefore it's easier for us to grade. So bring those materials. Also, the exam may be open note or open book, in which case you will need to have those materials as well. And then put your name on the test. If I don't know whose test it is, I can't give the proper credit for that. And this has happened in the past. Again, it should be really obvious. Put your name on the test, sign your work, in other words. But I've had students forget to do that, and I can't give credit to people if I don't know who gets the credit. So put your name on the test. Read the test first before you begin. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it helps you to budget your time because, again, you're dealing with that time limit. It is a timed situation. So do what is easy first and get that out of the way, and then focus your energy and time and attention on doing the more difficult stuff. So read the exam first before you do that, before you begin. Another reason why you should read it first is because part of what you're being tested on is your ability to follow directions. So read the test, identify what the directions are, and make sure that you do what you're supposed to be doing. And also read the test first because you may find that there are patterns to the test. And I'll admit that grading sucks. It's the worst part of the job. And that's not because the work is bad. It's because it's so time consuming. There's so much material to get through. So as instructors, we will make grading ourselves as easy as possible. So look for patterns in the test because there's a good chance they will be there because those patterns will help us when we grade. We can grade more quickly that way. So for example, in the past when I've given multiple choice exams, I have used a zigzag pattern in the answers. So the first question, the answer is A, and then the second one is B, then C, D, E, back to D, C, B, A, go back and forth that way because it becomes easy to identify deviations from the pattern. Also, when I've taught literature classes, I've used the rhyme scheme for the Italian sonnet as my answer key. So look for those patterns. There's a reasonable chance that they will be there. So that's a little hint or a little trick that you can use to take the test more easily. Again, follow the directions, identify the tasks. And this is an issue in essay exams specifically because the task that you're given in your exam prompt is going to be very specific. So, for example, to analyze does not mean the same thing as to argue or to discuss or to compare. When you analyze, that means you have to take something apart, break it down into its pieces and its components, and identify how they work, how they go together. Arguing means to take a stance and take a side of an issue. Discuss means to just explain or talk about the subject without taking a side. Compare means to look for similarities between two things. So look for the verb in the directions because that helps you to identify the task that you are expected to perform. And if you do the wrong task, if you argue when you're supposed to discuss, for example, then that's going to count against you. Budget your time. Like I said, you want to get the easy stuff out of the way first, and then focus on the more difficult stuff or the more time-consuming stuff. Look for patterns, as I've said. And then when it comes specifically to essay exams, you want to modify the writing process a little bit. Now, ordinarily, the writing process has those four basic stages of pre-writing, drafting, revising, and editing. Well, in the case of pre-writing, you're not going to have a whole lot of time to do that. So don't waste too much time on pre-writing, although I do recommend putting together a quick outline before you begin. Two reasons for that. One, it will help you to keep on task so that you'll have a plan that you can follow when you write your essay. And also, if you do run out of time and you have an outline there, your instructor will know what you had planned on discussing and perhaps will give you some credit for that. So, yeah, modify the writing process in that sense of pre-writing. Yeah, you can't free write, but you can do an outline or maybe do some clustering or whatever. The bulk of your time is going to be devoted to drafting, to writing the essay itself. And you want to modify that a little bit as well. Now, as we talked about before, when it comes to introductions, an introduction needs to do three things. It needs to present the subject, the topic, and the thesis. Now, in the case of an essay exam, the subject and the topic will be given to you as part of the exam prompt. So you don't need to repeat that. You can jump right into your thesis and get that out of the way, which gives you more time to focus on developing your thesis. And then you want to allow yourself some time at the end to do a little bit of revision and editing. Now, you can't fully revise, but you can go through, read over your exam, and make corrections that you need to make. Now, we know as instructors that you're going to make some grammatical errors. We will take that into account. That's not as big of a deal. But if you're making really obvious errors that you shouldn't be making, so for example, if you're writing an essay about Shakespeare and you keep misspelling Shakespeare's name, that's a problem. So you want to correct really obvious errors and stuff like that. So yeah, allow yourself some time to proofread and make some changes as necessary. And again, like I said, if you're writing your exam in an exam book, it's ideally you're going to be writing in pen. So if you do have mistakes in there, you can cross stuff out, write in the margins, do what you need to. Again, as instructors, we know that because of the test scenario, you're going to make some mistakes and you're going to need some extra room and space. We take that into account. You know, we've been students before, so we've been in that position. We understand. Okay, so that's really all there is to talk about this week. It is midterm week, so the midterm is ready to go, posted on e-learning. It is, no surprise, an essay exam. So you will have 3 hours to complete it, 3 hours because this is a 3-credit course. So 1 hour per credit. And that will be due by the end of this week. So once you begin the exam on e-learning, you have 3 hours to complete it. And after that, the exam will no longer be available. So just be aware of that. Once you start, you have to complete it in that sitting. Okay. So hopefully those tips will help you out, not just in this class, but for any exam that you have to take. So good luck with those, and I will talk to you again next week. Take care.